Peace and salutations, good people. Hoping that you are well as you tap in with us. It's been a minute, at least for me. I've got a lot going on right now. I'm actually recording live from my new office at Diablo Valley College, where I'm starting my tenure track position out here in Pleasant Hill, California, in my home county of Contra Costa, Coco County. But thank you so much for tuning in today. I'm very, very excited for this episode. But per usual, The Paper Plane is a podcast created and hosted by myself, Colin Masashi Roja Hio Ehara, where I interview people I am blessed and honored to share community with, asking them about a book or books that have had a transformative impact on their lives. And in a society where literacy rates are steadily declining, our attention spans and critical consciousness are under attack, and a growing number of podcasts hosted by cishet men consciously or unconsciously champion expressions of masculinity that come at the expense of women, femmes, and LGBTQIA2 spirit plus, especially BIPOC folks. This space imperfectly aims to operate as a counter narrative to those things. The Paper Plane is a space that intends to highlight the dire importance of relationships, community, dialogue, perpetual learning, honest expression as art, art as honest expression, freedom for literacy, and literacy for freedom. It speaks to planes of existence attached to the act of reading, but also as a metaphor for the quote unquote flights we take as we sit in what Ta-Nehisi Coates calls a one-way interface as readers, and how these journeys shape us. Today, we're joined by my brother and award-winning filmmaker and storyteller Tadashi Tad Nakamura, someone whose work has given voice to untold histories, specifically from an Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islanders perspective, and whose lens has always been guided by both craft and conscience. For this conversations, we're grounding ourselves in two remarkable books. The first is Mike De La Roca's Sacred Lessons, Teaching My Father to Love. The second is Chelsey Luger and Thosh Colin's The Seven Circles, Indigenous Teaching for Living Well. These aren't just books to read, they're invitations, and they call us to consider how love can be a political act, how community can be a healer and teacher, and how balance, spiritual, emotional, physical, etc., can be a form of resistance. With Tadashi, we'll explore how the wisdom in these works shows up in his life as a filmmaker who chronicles stories of cultural resilience, as an artist who builds bridges between histories, and a father, partner, son, community member navigating what it means to pass on love and justice to the next generation. And with that, I am so excited. I'm so honored to have Tad in the virtual building today. Tad, welcome, bro. How are you doing?
What's up, man? Glad to be here. Yeah, big fan of you, big fan of the pod. So
Oh man,
it's an honor to be here with you.
I appreciate that so much, fam. Um, well, wanna first kind of come in here and um uh, introduce Tad. I'm so happy to have you on here. So Tadashi Nakamura is an Emmy Award winning filmmaker and the director of the Watase Media Arts Center, a production company of the Japanese American National Museum. Tad was named CNN's Young People Who Rock for being the youngest filmmaker at the 2008 Sundance Film Festival. Now with over 20 years of filmmaking experience, his films include Nobuko Miyamoto, A Song in Movement, from 2024, Murals, 2016, Jake Shimabukuro, Life on Four Strings, 2013, A Song for Ourselves, one of my personal favorites that I use in the classroom regularly, 2009, and Pilgrimage in 2006. He is currently closing out touring his most recent film, Third Act, about his pioneering filmmaker father, Robert A. Nakamura, and his discovery and battle with Parkinson's disease. Tad's father, Robert, known to many as the godfather of Asian American media, passed away and transitioned to the ancestral realm in June of this year. I can attest as an audience member who attended the latest CAMS Film Festival at the Kabuki Theater in San Francisco's Nihonmachi, Japantown. There was not a dry eye in the building as we witnessed this powerful work of art and heart. Tad has an MA in social documentation from UC Santa Cruz and a BA in Asian American Studies from UCLA. He made the Doc NYC 40 Under 40 list in 2019 and was a 2020 to 2022 Firelight Media Documentary Lab Fellows and a 2022-2023 Sundance Asian American Fellow. He is currently a mentor for the 2024 CAM Fellowship and recipient of the 2024 Rockwood Documentary Leaders Fellowship. So Ted, we were just talking about this a moment ago, but we are in some some dire times at the moment. And I know that just yesterday, today is Friday, August 15th, that just yesterday, ICE showed up in mass in front of the Japanese American National Museum. And so, I thought might just actually jump in and kind of see like, where your head's at with all that, with that being super, super fresh at the moment.
Yeah, I think like I mean like everyone, right? It's we're at a time where every day there's a new fire to put out, or every day there's something else to strategize, to organize around. But also every day there's a trauma being created that we will need to heal from either immediately or later on. Um, so I think Little Tokyo has been in a unique situation just because its proximity to the building, where so for a lot of folks who saw when it really went down last month in the streets with the protesters and the FBI agents, National Guard, ICE, that was all in front of um, Janum's building.
Yeah,
So I think Little Tokyo has kind of been in the middle physically of this ongoing battle in our city. But yeah, just yesterday, um, the governor Newsom was going to have a press conference and chose one of our facilities to have that press conference, which was basically going, about how his his team and the state of California is strategically going to resist what's going on federally, with Trump. And of course, the ICE agents took it upon themselves to basically crash that party. They knew exactly what they were doing.
sure.
Uh, rolled up, and so I think on one hand it's terrible, but on the other hand, I think it's forcing the Little Tokyo community, it's forcing Japanese Americans to realize that this is not just something you read on your social media feed or see on the news that's kind of a arm's distance. This is
Mhm.
very much about us as well. That fear that other communities are feeling in a much greater way. We also need to feel and understand that. Yeah, so I think on one hand, the best outcome of all this is to help galvanize maybe those who might be on the fence or might theoretically be against what's going on, but this might push them to actually take action. And
Mm.
and me being, I think something, might talk about is I think for both of us who are in this like midlife crisis, potentially washed dad era.
Absolutely.
Uh, so it's one of those things of like 20 years ago, easily we would be on the streets on the front lines.
Mhm.
But now that we're, you know, just time wise, but even safety wise, like I don't know if we'd actually bring our kids to some of these actions. I think we should, but the the fear for their safety is very real. So I think I'm in this space too of like, what is my role now? And I don't know how you're feeling, especially right. Not only are we older, and you know, I pull muscles trying to tie my shoes these days. But also, I think we are now part of these institutions,
Mhm.
and how we navigate our own institutions. But yes, actually, kind of curious to you how you're feeling in reaction not only to ICE, but the
Yeah.
genocide that's going on in Palestine, and just where our our roles in the movement are shifting. And I think
Yeah.
half of it is what we choose to do, other half is what the movement is asking of us for. But I'm constantly negotiating that in addition to every week, every day, something new is happening.
Mm.
But curious, yeah, curious how you're feeling on that tip.
Nah, man, I appreciate everything you just shared. I mean, so many thoughts, but I think where I begin is just like thinking historically about our elders, whether they were, parents or and or grandparents, great grandparents that were incarcerated, right, during World War II because of racism, white supremacy, and xenophobia. And then for the, for, Newsom to pick, that particular place, probably with some of that in mind, right? And then for ICE to, crash that and thinking about kind of, generationally. Sorry, are you Sansei, Yonsei?
Yonsei.
Okay, yeah, we're both Yonsa, right? And so like thinking about like, yeah, like especially having, being a parent where, I think a lot of folks that we know are in this space of like having smaller children and also aging parents, right? And so like being in that space, it can be, while also, like working full time, it can be really, really at times like overwhelming, if and when, we struggle to be present and like kind of locked into whatever's in front of us to like think about the the bigger stuff. And so I think we're both incredibly fortunate to be connected to communities that we can tap in, in the places where we feel like um make the most sense for us to support in the best possible ways we can, considering the capacity that we have, right? Because yeah, we're not in our 20s anymore, right? And we have all these different responsibilities as well. I don't know if I don't know what we are anymore, geriatric millennials, exennials, like what we are. But um, I mean, yeah, just like violence abounds. And, I think that a lot of what I've been personally in these last, I would say, year or two, and I just recall, right, that also in the lunar calendar, this is the year of the snake, right? And so thinking about like the midlife crisis, right? Like it's like, shedding of skins, a lot of like, death, rebirth, I feel like happening in my life and a lot of people that I know are going through a lot of transitions or like coming to like clarity around things that were not clear and like and in changing things in their life. I thought I've had a number of loved ones, yourself included, who have lost beloved family members and people close to them recently. So I think like yeah, I'm just thinking about this space of transition um, as a whole because yeah, I mean, just like as a student, a perpetual student, teacher of history, history teaches us that, you know, it's always darkest before the dawn. But I think a lot of us are just like, how fucking dark is it gotta get before some light comes out? Um, but I do think, the books that you chose are incredibly powerful in this moment and thinking about all of these things. And so I was going to jump into briefly kind of touching on those before starting to ask you some questions, if that's cool.
Yeah, I just also have to say I think I'm feeling insecure, but it's also ironic that I'm on a podcast about literature and books because all the homies who know me tease me that I don't read ever. And so I think it is hilarious and I'm gonna try to do my best, but it is true. I don't read that much. I listen to many audiobooks though. Like I consume content. I just read really slow. I've always read slow. Actually I kind of realized it too because I never knew why I didn't like reading. And now I kind of realized that it just my skill level is so bad. So when I read, I literally read out loud in my head. I
Mm,
can't, so the speed at which I read out loud is the same as when I'm reading not out loud. And
mm,
so I don't think I realized that until I talked to other people and they're like, oh yeah, I could like I can consume multiple words at the same time. But all to say, I'm gonna do my best. But for sure, I'm a big fan of the podcast, and for sure, everyone else you've had on the show is definitely way more well read than I am. But I'm gonna do my best.
Hey, you know what? No, yeah, no need for, any explanations in the beginning. And one of the first things that I teach in any of my courses, no matter what age the students are, is I talk about sociologist Howard Gardner identifies that there's at least 9 different forms of intelligence. And I think, in school, at any level generally we get fed, I think, this lie that there's like a hierarchy around, these different forms of intelligence and like, kind of like numbers and like STEM being at the top, maybe with, close to like, stuff around language and words and writing and things like that, that's specific to like formal standard academic English. But, there are so many different forms of intelligence, that abound in people. And so much of what I try to do here and in my work as an educator is to shed light on those things. And so, and the other piece too that I was going to add too is especially having children that are so little and like, I spent so much of these past years doing audiobooks because, if I'm putting like my yachty to sleep, I gotta have the lights off. And so I just keep my earbuds in and then I can, it was like one of the only ways I was actually able to engage with books. So, I very much value kind of any form of literacy, whether it's sitting down and reading, like a PDF or it's listening. So, yeah, no worries whatsoever. So happy to have you here. And so y'all, Tad has chosen 2 really incredible texts. And the first one is entitled Sacred Lessons, Teaching My Father How to Love. And in this book, Mike de la Rocha explores how inherited definitions of manhood profoundly impacted his ability to connect with his father, his family, and ultimately himself, inviting readers on a transformative journey of self-discovery, forgiveness, and love. And Tad recently told me that Mike De La Roca is actually the cousin of the great famed lead singer of Rage Against the Machine, Zach De La Roca. And the second book is entitled The Seven Circles. And in this book, Chelsey, Luger, and Thosh Collins share intimate stories from their life journeys growing up in tribal communities, from the indigenous tradition of staying active and spiritually centered through running and dance, to the universal indigenous emphasis on a light-filled minimalist home to create sacred space. Along the way, Luger and Collins invite readers to both adapt these teachings to their lives, as well as to do so without appropriating and erasing the original context, representing a critical new ethos for the wellness space. Each chapter closes with practical advice on how to engage with the teachings, as well as wisdom for keeping that particular circle in harmony with the others. The Seven Circles teaches its readers how to connect with nature, with community, and with self, and to integrate ancient indigenous philosophies of health and well-being into our own lives to find healing and balance. Let's go. Okay, so Brother Tad, you have navigated so much in 2025, and we're like just barely halfway through it. And as an artist, as an educator, as a father, a son, a husband, and a human in general, particularly at a time like we were just, noting when our society and world is on figurative, literal fire. I'm really excited to talk about these books, both of which you introduced me to and what they meant to you in this period of your life. And my first question, with this theme of like the paper plane, right, is, just simply kind of what flights or journeys would you say these books have taken you on?
Yeah, I think starting off with the seven circles, um, I think we know each other real well, but I think there's a and I feel I'm curious too if you feel the same way, but I think I was raised a certain way, specifically in a very male, toxic sports jock kind of, even I would say hip hop in its 80s and 90s era, um, where when I went to college and got politicized, I felt like there was a big shift. But I think and since then, I've been trying to unlearn a lot of the things that I was raised to be. But it's hard, and it kind of goes back to the film I did on my dad called Third Act, where my dad talks about Japanese American World War II incarceration, but he talks about how he has a sense of ambivalence about it.
Hmm.
And there was a moment during the movement where he couldn't really talk about that ambivalence because then it's like, what do you that feels he couldn't talk about all the positive elements or at least memories that he had during camp.
Yeah.
But towards the end of his life, he was able to articulate that. I kind of feel the same way where now I have to admit that there are certain elements of that, grade school to high school upbringing that I have benefited from and has actually helped me as an artist. Um, so I'm trying to wrap my head around that currently of like, okay, can you take the good without the bad? Can you separate that? All to say, I still very much identify as a meathead, right? Like I like working out, I like watching football, I like, doing a lot of stuff that during college in, very much student activist realm, I was either almost embarrassed about or felt like I had to compartmentalize and keep it
Hmm.
separate. Like, I mean, literally, right? Like no one at the student org meeting was going to come with me to the gym later,
Hmm.
um,
Yeah.
or watch football or go to the football game with me on a Saturday. I had my other friends in the dorms that weren't involved in the student organizing to do that. But I think when I found specifically, uh, Chelsey and Thosh online through their Instagram posts. Um, that really through them they married the two worlds that I felt I was in. I mean, also, besides meathead wise, I'm very much for the last probably 15 years I've been on this like self-development tip. And
Mm.
I used to call it like white man secrets because majority of them are written by like these white men, right? Like Tony Robbins and like
Yeah.
all these motivational speakers, and it's super cheesy.
Yeah, now it's like Kendrick on Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers was like on Eckhart Tolle and stuff.
Right, right, exactly. I mean, I literally listened to Eckhart's "Want to Go to Sleep"
Yeah,
because, and
same.
and as a Buddhist, I feel really weird about that because
Totally.
he's just appropriating Buddhist theory to like a white audience. But
Sure.
at the same time, I listen to it and
Yeah,
consume it and
yeah,
get something out of it.
absolutely.
Um, so I think when I discovered, and this is also too when the first time I kind of truly lived outside of LA in my own community. Um, I was living in Arizona, and so at that time, uh, I was really getting hip on the indigenous movement that was going on
Yeah.
in a dope way because I had always, felt very much a part of the Asian American scene, the art scene, but even things, from streetwear to, hip hop culture.
Hmm.
I basically discovered this whole native scene that was going on that I didn't know about while I was in Arizona.
Mm.
And so, that was music, fashion, but also wellness.
Mm.
And so when I met, when I discovered Thosh and Chelsey's work online, all of a sudden it became like okay to talk about working out. It became
Mm.
okay to talk about, your morning routine, your sleep schedule. I'm also that dude that has like I have my Aura ring on one hand, I have my Fitbit on the other.
Mm.
Like I do, intermittent fasting. I do all the quote unquote like biohacking. And I felt like they were able to draw those connections, but also deepen it to where they connect wellness, they connect going to the gym to your ancestors, right? Or they connect being healthy, getting sleep to social movements.
Mm.
And for me, that was just like, oh, there's this space um, that I could mesh the two worlds. So
Yeah.
real quickly, like it's called Seven Circles, And the seven circles are community, land, food, sleep, movement, ceremony, and sacred space.
Mm.
And those were all, on one hand, things that I knew in my own community what those meant, but
Yeah.
it was really interesting and probably more inspiring to hear from them from an indigenous perspective
Hmm.
how those elements uh, are part of their day-to-day life as well as their their ancestry as well as their contemporary communities. So that one really like I felt like it was like this aha moment for me to blend those two worlds.
Mm.
And I could talk about it more later, but I think for Mike's book, Sacred Lessons, just going back to so Mike De La Rocha is a friend of mine, and I met him at UCLA. But the way I met him was as a freshman. He was one of those like even in high school, right? There's like the cool seniors, and you're a little freshman. You're like, oh my God, like that
Ooh.
guy's so cool. And so there was a handful of them that luckily, have continued to inspire me, continued to support and mentor me that I'm still friends with.
Yeah.
So Mike, I've been friends with him for since college, and he's always, even back then, was a huge role model for me because as a straight cis male, he was the one that was. I mean, none of us are perfect, but he was at least working on himself,
Yeah.
like
Mhm.
and being vulnerable and understanding that he had a lot similar to me, had a lot of things to unlearn as
Mm.
men of color.
Mhm.
Um, but we, I think since then we were both doing our things. He does amazing. I mean, he's a business owner, entrepreneur, organizer, artist. I mean, he's dope.
Yeah.
Uh, but we kind of reconnected when I heard this book was coming out, and I'd heard about the book was about his dad, and about him trying to writing this book as part of his grief process, as well as learning to be a better father, a better partner, a better community member. So he sent me a. So basically, I texted him. I was like, "Yo, like, it's been a minute, but we're on the same vibe, like always. I'm just finishing this film on my dad,
Mm.
and it's so parallel." So I sent him uh, a kind of early cut of third act,
Ah.
and right away he hit me back and was like, "We got to do something together." My book is exactly what similar themes, multi-generational,
Yeah.
grandfather, son, grandfather, father, son, child, four generations of men of color and trying to navigate the different traumas that we've all gone through. And so when I looked over again, I don't read, so I tried to get through as much as the transcript as I could, and it was dope. It was, but I just like it literally takes me like a week to get through like 10 pages of a book.
Mm.
Um, and that's completely on me, not anything on the literature that I read. But when he actually dropped his audio book uh, in June, and that's when my own dad started taking a turn for the worst.
Mm.
And
That's
so that book really, so basically, the last 3 weeks of my dad's life, I was trying to be with him every day. I mean, I think anyone who's had the privileged slash traumatic experience of watching a loved one go through hospice,
yeah.
um, I was basically watching my dad die,
Yeah.
and would be laying in bed with him, would be doing all the things that one does when a loved one is dying and in hospice. But I would listen to the audiobook of Sacred Lessons
Wow.
to on one hand, because the storytelling is so great where I get absorbed in the story. So on one hand, it's can get my mind out of my own reality, but at the same time, it was so parallel to what I was going through that it didn't feel like an escape. It actually
Mm,
forced me to be more present. It forced me to be braver, to not be afraid of what was going on. And it really helped. It really helped me get through that time. And in the end, I'm really grateful for the time I did spend with my dad those last 3 weeks. But at the same time, I think that book, one, the book came to my and Mike came into my life at the right time, but specifically that audio book because like you said, right, like you can listen to it while I'm laying with my dad, or I can listen to it on the drive from, my house to my parents' house. So that one, really came into my life and helped me get through that tough time.
mm. Man, Tad, thank you so much for sharing. I deeply, deeply appreciate it. So much resonates. I'm gonna try to keep this as short as possible. Be like, yeah, so many thoughts. Um, the first, that super like just like popped into my head immediately when you were, talking about, I think some of the compartmentalizing pieces, right? Is like I'm thinking about when I first go to Santa Cruz as an undergrad, um, and I'm coming from, a school district that, is predominantly working class BIPOC, and I graduated the year 2000, right? And so I remember, like, and I also was very, very, I would say, unique to that particular community that I grew up in that, my mother, um, continues to be, this real, has really powerful kind of vision around feminism and like liberation for women, femmes, female body folks, queer folks. And so, I got a lot of early resource around like learning about a lot of things like that, but also at the same time, because I'm mixed heritage, right? And so my mother is white and Haudenosaunee Mohawk, and racialized white, but also very much culturally native, and it's like Mohawk language teacher. Goes to like Mohawk language immersion in Tyondenega territory every summer. And then my pops, right, is Sansei, Japanese American from Richmond, right, where I grew up, and like, very much raised working class. And I remember like feeling growing up and feeling like a lot of like tension at times of like trying to hold both of those things, but over time being able to marry them, like these different lenses that my parents had while also creating something new for myself. And but I'm thinking about like going to Santa Cruz and like experiencing some of the same things you did as far as like I remember, like going to open mics and I would like do poetry, but like, I was like the only one that was like wearing sports gear. I had like a Barry Bonds jersey, I remember, and like getting funny looks because of that. And like and but but then it's like I think about my two of my heroes, right? Who I imagine probably two of your heroes as well, in Bruce Lee and Tupac, right? And how much I like appreciate is like Bruce Lee was like a philosopher and a poet and an artist, but he also would rock your shit if like, he's like one of the most hyper masculine, dudes in US popular culture, right? And then Tupac, like really similarly, right, could make Hit 'Em Up, but he also could make, the most like vulnerable, tender, songs about how much his mother meant to him, right? So I think like early on, I was like looking for ways to be able to tap into these energies that, I think you said it well, like what kind of constructed, around us as like being really, really separate, right? And then being able to kind of find examples where they could come together. And I just pulled up this quick little quote, and I think I was texting you about this the other day because you sent me some stuff about, Thosh and Chelsey. And I was like, oh, it reminds me of this book. But Liz Plank, she writes in her book, For the Love of Men, a new vision for mindful masculinity. She says, But of course, saying just let go of toxic masculinity to a man is like saying just relax to a person having a panic attack. Men will only break free from the masculinity trap when they have a safe alternative. But for the time being, they're growing up receiving the message that they are being surveilled and that any deviation from the ideals created by rigid masculinity will be grounds for embarrassment and rejection from men as well as women. The change is first and foremost individual, but it also has to be collective. No one is free from gender norms, and the messages that men receive about their gender is setting them up to fail, particularly in their intimate relationships. And so I bring that up just because, when, she speaks about like, what are alternatives, it sounds like, from what I gather, like these two books presented you with some really powerful alternatives. Um, and so, as we kind of jump in here, both Sacred Lessons, The Seven Circles, they're deeply personal works about healing, love, intergenerational knowledge. And I'm wondering, was there a passage or a message in either book that made you pause and think like this is speaking directly to where I am in my life and in my art right now, especially in the wake of creating third act. And you were already speaking to some of this, but wondering if there's any other pieces that are coming to mind for you about.
Yeah, I think, in the Seven Circles, there's just a lot of bars. And I think well, one thing that what was great about reading that book and also just following, Thosh Collins and Chelsey Luger was seeing that what they're trying to do in their community and for their people is what we're trying to do for our community and our people and our families. And so, I think there's this one. So because I even for me when I make films, and this is I was kind of fundamentally became a filmmaker from through my dad, and this is his whole thing was we need to make films for ourselves first and foremost because but also there's other Asian American filmmakers who are making films for quote unquote representation, right?
Yeah.
To explain ourselves to outside the community, or specifically sometimes to the white majority, right? Or
Hmm.
even film wise to the industry, to the mass kind of entertainment world of film. But he was always saying, like, we're so fucked up ourselves because of years and years of stereotypes, invisibility, misrepresentation, exotification, exploitation, um, that we need to prioritize our own community. But just because you make a film centering our community doesn't mean it's not accessible to others, right?
Hmm.
We're
Yeah.
not necessarily by centering ourselves as the audience doesn't necessarily mean we're excluding other people. And so, in Seven Circles, there's this part where it says, we know that the indigenous people who are reading this book will be excited to find a wellness resource that appropriately acknowledges the real root of most health problems in America today, settler colonialism.
Mm.
We encourage all readers to duly remember that settler colonialism is not an isolated system that only affected Native people in the past. It is an ongoing process that continues to harm the health and livelihood of all exploited lands today and the people who live on them.
Ooh, goddamn.
So, I think that really hit me of like they are writing this for their community, but they're also acknowledging that other people can glean, but at the same time they made it very specific that this is who we're writing the
Yeah,
the book for.
nice.
Um and I really just appreciated that. I think there's just like little bars, as a dad, there's you know, Thosh says, we lift weights to lift so we can lift babies. I think they're and as I mean, honestly, I never appreciated being in shape until I had a kid. And you realize, carrying a baby for a certain amount of time, how just your shoulder muscle, you get carpal tunnel, like also just to be able to physically survive not sleeping. I mean, and this is coming from like my perspective as a father. Like,
Yeah.
I what my partner had to do physically is just on a whole other level too. So this
So
is just like,
let's both acknowledge that.
yeah, yeah, this is me like as just the father just trying to do what I can do and like let alone like trying to recover from everything,
Yeah,
you know.
absolutely.
Um so yeah, those were I mean there's some other ones that I think let's see. Sorry, hold on.
That's
Oh. Oh, okay. Another one was just again drawing those connections. It says healthy people make healthy families. Healthy families make healthy communities. And healthy communities make a stronger, safer, cleaner, more balanced world. Contrary to what the wellness industry will tell you, the pursuit of health is not about good looks, image, or social status. Contrary to what patriarchal systems have demonstrated throughout history, the building of strength is not about overpowering others. Instead, the indigenous perspective on health is one that is focused on healing from within in order to cause a positive outward ripple effect, contributing to a greater good and redistributing strength. Creating community is wellness.
mm,
Um, and I think that it we just realize that movement work, creative work, it's also a physical act.
yeah,
And I do think it's probably secondary, right? I mean, the primary is a consciousness, a understanding of learning, a lot of self-work. But once you get to a point where this needs to be taken action, right? Like if you have a big action, civil disobedience, or if you're organizing, or for you, like you have to come up with curriculum, you have to perform in front of your students to engage them, right? That is a physical and mental act. And
absolutely.
a lot of all the stuff that, getting sleep, eating right, meditating, but also like hitting the gym, like getting your runs in, those are all what's going to enable you to do the work.
100%.
Um, so yeah, that I don't know, that was a long answer to your question, but and also too, I think I'm curious how you feel. We had youth on our side at one time, right? Like we
Mhm.
could eat,
At one time.
yeah, we could eat junk food, get no,
Yeah.
like, right, like at least in my college experience, which was my introduction to student organizing, we took the worst care of ourselves. We were going from meeting to meeting to meeting, not sleeping, eating junk food, and
Hella
then we
Costco pizza.
exactly, and then probably consuming a lot of alcohol and weed
100%.
that was not necessarily the best for us.
Yeah.
And but we could get away with it. I feel now, I don't know how you feel, but I can't get away with like I have to actually work on maintaining a certain health and energy. And
Hmm.
also I think what was interesting for both sacred lessons and seven circles and even going back to third act with my dad is again in when I was younger, it was about getting stronger. It was about probably being able to dominate, probably able to defend yourself.
Mm,
And now I'm realizing it's this aspect of healing,
sure.
right? And that is something that, you know, I'm processing and try to wrap my head around. But this concept of strength or self, taking care of yourself to allow yourself to heal necessarily versus to get stronger or to
Mhm.
get faster.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Oh no, that's yeah, really beautifully articulated. And I was laughing a moment ago because I was in HIT class last week and I was doing medicine ball slams and then my partner was like, it's just like picking up a toddler. And I was like, it for sure it's just like picking up a toddler. Um
so you can't drop that toddler on the ground.
yeah, so you're not slamming your toddler into the ground. But the pickup part was
Yeah,
well
but
man,
I, I
Oh, go ahead.
No, I think I sent you some of those videos of Thosh and
Yeah.
Chelsey. So that's another parallel is that both authors of both of these books are pretty much the same age as I am.
Mm,
And so again, I don't know Chelsey and Thosh, but they had their first kid around the same time I had my first kid.
mm,
And so, I mean, literally, they have them doing squats with the baby, right? Or
mm.
them doing like, wall sits holding the baby. And those were just very functional things that I could that helped me because you can't go to the gym when you're a parent with young kids. And
Yeah.
so little
So,
things like that was just on a very functional level was
yeah,
helpful.
absolutely. And I remember doing squats when Io was first born. I like put her on my shoulders. Um, well, so yeah, on this note, right, of parenthood, Mike Della Rocha, is it Rocha or Roca?
I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. I don't know. Like I've always said Rocha, but I also mispronounce my own last name. So it
I feel you on that. But Sacred Lessons explores the complexities of a father-son relationship and the act of teaching love across generational divides. Having made third act about your own father, Robert A. Nakamura, how did this book deepen or shift the way you understand the artistic, intellectual, spiritual, and or emotional inheritance between fathers and sons?
I I think there was so many parallels, but at the same time there were so many differences, and I think that was the great part of it.
Yeah.
Um, I think for Mike, he was the one really that had to break a certain cycle of masculinity, a certain cycle of how the men in his family communicate. Um, and as much as, my dad is also kind of in between generations. So my bachan is a Nisei that was born in Northern California to migrant farm workers, but my Jichan is actually an Issei that came from Kagoshima.
Mm,
So my dad is half Sansei, half Nisei, or another way to put it is he's a younger Nisei or older Sansei.
yeah.
Um, but what I realized is that my dad was the one that broke a lot of those cycles
Mm,
for me. So because the full right title right is Sacred Lessons Teaching My Father How to Love. Um, that's because his dad never told him he loved him.
mhm.
Um, and that's the one thing that really Mike is one really just wanted and yearned for, but also too was trying to wrap his head around that. Um, and also he talks about how, his even on a much more machismo level, his grandfather definitely didn't tell his father he loved him.
Yeah.
So as much as I see my dad as old school, he's very much a Nisei father, very much a Japanese American man.
Mhm.
My dad did still tell me he loved me. He
Mhm.
wouldn't do it. He would do it in different ways, but
Sure.
at least when I would tell him I love you, Dad, he would say I love you too. And I think also I think just the vulnerability and the communication that Mike wished he had from his dad, and then therefore made sure he does as a father to his kids. I realized that my dad, through making third act, was extremely vulnerable.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and I'm realizing, the power. I, I think the film definitely has an impact on the audience for different reasons.
Man, it blew me away, bro.
Oh, thank you. But
Absolutely.
but I think the key to that is the vulnerability of
Yeah.
my dad. And I think most people haven't seen an Asian or Asian American man of his generation be that vulnerable,
Absolutely,
um,
bro.
which then forced me to be more vulnerable, right? But
Mhm.
I'm just realizing, going back to just these, whether basically trying to, like you said originally, the question is there such thing as a positive masculinity, right? Is there such thing as non-toxic masculinity? And I'm still, trying to figure what that is, but I am realizing that vulnerability is at least a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
And the fact that Mike was so vulnerable in his book, and the fact that my dad was so vulnerable in the film, um, you know, helps provide some guidance for me as a father too,
Mm,
as well as a homie, as well as an artist, as well as a community member.
yeah, absolutely. Man, I think there's so much courage in, when folks step into these places of being open and transparent about their struggles and their challenges, right? And for, I would say, men of color experiencing generational trauma in the US context, like, I think when folks are able to muster the courage to do that, it's like Cornel West says, courage is contagious, right? And so I appreciate, your G-Chan, your pops, and your courageous courage in all of this. And kind of been thinking about, this line of ancestral cultural knowledge that is intentionally or unintentionally kind of, inherited. The seven circles emphasizes living well, right, through ancestral teachings. And I'm wondering, how does that framework speak to your work at the Watase Media Arts Center, where you're preserving, you're telling stories rooted in Japanese American and Asian American histories?
Well, I think what I enjoyed about um, that book, Seven Circles, is they talk about community, right? They talk about in their community, just everyone has a role,
Yeah.
but they also talk about how the land and their ancestors are very much with them and guiding them
Mm,
in those roles. And so for me, I think being the director of the Watase Media Arts Center at the Japanese American National Museum is very much connected to my family, right? So my parents, Bob Nakamura and Karen Ishizuka, founded the Media Arts Center at Janum in the early 90s. And so it's part of, in a way, like this lineage. And that's something that it, I don't even know if it's a American or Western thing, but there was always this question. People would always question me of like, do you one, it's either could be seen as nepotism, which I totally will say it is. I definitely have been provided so many privileges and opportunities through nepotism or being their kid. Um, or from like an artist side, a lot of people are like, don't you ever just want to do your own thing? Like, don't you want to break out of the shadow of your parents? Um, or define, do it, don't just do what your parents did. Um, but I think even within Japanese culture and other, there's a family that does a certain craft, and
absolutely. That was
and that's a
exactly what I was
privilege.
thinking.
Yeah, right. There's that master apprentice
Uh-huh.
situation
Yeah.
that um exists. And so I've always taken that sense or that approach where I'm very proud to do exactly what my parents do.
Mhm.
I'm very proud to be given the privileges and opportunity. Well, not proud of the privileges, but I think, that like the cliches, with privilege comes pressure, right? And
Mhm.
I always welcome that pressure because it comes with the privileges. I'd rather
Yeah.
have that rather than no privilege and no pressure.
Mm.
So me working at the Watase Media Arts Center, I very much feel like my family has always served a certain role in the community, and now this is my opportunity to carry on that role.
Mhm.
Um, and I think it goes deeper than just a day job.
Mhm.
It's the whether it's in my blood DNA or whether in the spectrum of our community, specifically the Little Tokyo community in LA, there's a spot on that spectrum that needs to be held down. And I feel like I'm able to do that um, through as well as having the huge privilege of being able to earn a living while doing that role.
Hmm.
So I think yeah, I think the Seven Circles really helped me own that a little bit more, and also actually really helped me think a little bit more, not spiritually, but on a different level than just the the politics, either just the message, right? Because as filmmakers, we obviously have a point of view, and the filmmaker that I am is also obviously documenting the Japanese American community for certain reasons. And then there's the artistic level
Sure.
of, the craft of and there is a science to it, but then
Yeah.
there's also this creativity, and kind of where you tap into that. And, so it's this whole thing of, I mean, that was funny because I was actually thinking of mentioning Rick Rubin's latest book. I think it's called The Creative Act.
Mm.
Uh, but again, all the books, like very in a shameful way, most of these self-help books that I read are written by white men, and I didn't feel the need to
White
bring
man
that into this
secrets
space.
is helpful.
But I think what he mentions, right, is you're a conduit to a certain extent
Mm.
as a storyteller.
Mhm.
Um, and it's you were chosen to do this, but a lot of he has a saying like keep your channel up, I mean keep your antenna up and your channel clear,
Mm.
because once, whether that's inspiration, whether that's your ancestors, whether that's whatever that that moment as an artist where something clicks, like it's higher than just yourself.
Mhm.
And I think reading Seven Circles really kind of opened me up to that. Versus like, because I come from, a jock background, an athlete background, and that one is like, which has definitely helped me as a filmmaker, but it's just getting your reps in, right? It's studying tape. It's control. It's like you're only gonna get better if the harder you work, the more you hone your craft. But then also every athlete knows that there's this moment where you get in the zone where the best, because I used to play running back, and the best plays I ever made was when you're not thinking.
Yeah.
You're just moving, you're just
Absolutely.
reacting. And as an artist, I've been trying to figure out how does that work? How do you get in the zone? How do you get in flow creatively? And I think that really you only have so much control. All you can do is keep your antenna up and your channel clear,
Mm.
because you don't know when it's going to come. But when it does come, you got to make sure you download that and you let it tell itself through you.
Ooh, I love that. I mean, it makes, yeah, like, yeah, when I've heard like, flow described, it's like when you're really in it, it's like I mean, a few things like you named like, um my mentor, our homie Cam, right? I remember he would always say repetition is the key to mastery, right? And so I think about from a teaching aspect, like in these moments where I'm in the flow and like I'm not overthinking, I'm not really thinking, just kind of, I've done these things so many times that it's just kind of organically happening and playing out and I'm moving and it's like when you're in those moments, you feel so alive. I just absolutely love it. The other thing I was going to say before transition, is man, like you know, uh, nepotism never comes to mind in my mind when I think about you. I think when I hear that word, I think of like white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, like untalented, lazy, folks like being handed things, right? And I love the way that you kind of tie these kind of indigenous frameworks of thinking about roles in community and to some of like our indigenous ancestry, indigenous Japanese ancestry, ways of being and seeing around like a family was like you know our family makes knives and we're like really fucking good at it, right? And like and then I'm gonna teach you how to make knives and you're gonna be really good at it, right? Or like or like we have the best soba noodles ever, right? And that's like what we do. And I've spent 10,000 hours making soba noodles, and I'm gonna teach you how to do that, you know? So like I really love those ties. Um, but like if you weren't just immensely fucking talented and didn't bust your ass in the ways that like I do and don't know, um, maybe you could say some nepotism stuff, but like yeah, I don't yeah, it's like 1,000 football fields away from me. Like when I think about you and your work.
Oh,
Um,
thanks.
yeah. And so let's see. Just because of time, let me think here. Yeah, let's go here. So, I know both of us, right? Like family means the world to us, community means the world to us. And it can be really fucking challenging to find balance amidst like everything that we're doing all the time. And so when it comes to balancing circles and creative life, Luger and Collins outline 7 circles of wellness, as you spoke to, body, mind, spirit, and community included. I imagine there's countless ebbs and flows in your life, but after 2 decades in a demanding industry, while being a partner, parent, how do you maintain balance, especially when your projects can be so emotionally and historically charged?
I'm still trying to figure that out. And I think I ask every parent that I know, what's the secret? Like, how do you balance? And the same answer is that there's no such thing as balance.
Yeah.
And even, a good friend of mine, Anita, mentioned even as partners, right? She said it's never going to be equal, right? Or it's never going to be balanced. So again, I don't have an answer for that. I think for me is I think to understand that one thing feeds the other,
Mm,
right? I think having meditation, working out, that will help me become a better filmmaker, um, or a better parent, or being a better community member, a better filmmaker might help me become a better parent, or for sure being a parent will help me in all aspects. So I think uh, realizing that it's instead of trying to keep all these compartments equal and balanced, it's trying to realize how they're one and the same,
mm.
and therefore it's not taking away. I think the hardest part for me is when I'm talking about balance, I'm actually talking about time. I'm
Huh.
actually talking about hours in the day.
Sure.
And so, yeah, I mean, I think for going back to these books, they were examples of how they're incorporating, especially um, Seven Circles, because Thosh and Chelsey are a couple, right? They're in partnership. They have kids, which actually, is similar to my parents. My parents aren't only partners, but they're a team. They've always worked together. My mom's has always been the producer. My dad's been the director.
Mm.
And so I think, and I think maybe even third act is an example of that. Maybe we'll see, uh, of integrating. So both of these books, the reason why they're so powerful is because it's so personal, it's
Yeah.
so intimate, and it's combining all those things, right? It's combining their family life, their community, their ancestral background, as well as their passions, and
Mm.
all for the purpose of empowering their own communities, and
Sure.
and trying to make actual systemic change. So yeah, I mean, I think I don't have an answer for that. I mean, I'm actually curious how you feel with that. Being all the hats that you wear.
Yeah.
Uh, where are you at with that right now?
Man, well, I think I'll first say that, I think you say you didn't have an answer, but I feel like you did have a really compelling answer. In just like, speaking to how incredibly complex and layered it all is. But my initial reaction was actually I was thinking back to the beginning of our conversation and thinking about Pac and Bruce Lee and how years ago I was tasked with because I used to when I was working at East Oakland SEPTA College at Fremont High School with Dr. Kim and Dr. Jeff Duncan Andrade. We taught a number of books, but one of them was the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. And I remember being so like enamored with it. I was like, there were so many ties to like, I grew up in Jodo Shinshu Buddhist temple in Berkeley. And it and I found Jodo Shinshu Buddhism in a time when I'd gone through a lot of like really traumatic stuff and like lost a lot of people when I was really little. Um, and it gave me a lot of tools to understand suffering specifically. But I was tasked with at my old school bringing because we had these core philosophies and they were like Sankofa and Lak'ech, critical pedagogy, and then the one I was asked to kind of like teach or like introduce to the school community of educators was Yin Yang. And so, that was like Bruce Lee's symbol was yin yang, right? And so a lot of like what you're speaking to around balance, I was like really thinking about, I was like Tupac and Bruce Lee both are very much these examples of yin yang, where it was like, you know, light and dark with light inside the dark and dark inside the light. And it's actually chaotic. It's not like this perfect like thing that stays still, right? Yin yang is constantly in movement. And I was like thinking about how even like with partnerships or parenting, like even if we're thinking about Chelsey and Thosh, it's like they are kind of yin yang together, but even in themselves as individuals, they have yin yang as far as like it looks to me, and I don't know tons about them yet, but like it looks to me like they have this really powerful balance of like masculine and feminine energies, like both able to be very very tender and like nurturing with each other, with their children, but also both look like you wouldn't want to fight either of them. You know what I mean? Like, and so I don't know, I think like I'm thinking about yin yang is immediately coming to mind when I think about um balance in life and how, and sometimes like the dark is like way more, taking over and the light is less there, like we are now, I feel like in our society and world. And I'm waiting for, the balance to come back and shift the other way. But the last thought was just like I was thinking about like, Kendrick has all these allusions in GNX album about things like that, right? Like Big Face Buddha, get my peace from within. I'm all up in my yin, right? Which is like the masculine energy. And in Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers very much felt like more of the yang, like, more like reflective and like kind of working on healing, right? So that he could come and just like GNX and blow Aubrey out the water. But as a former athlete, um, I'd argue, right, there's much to be learned about interconnectedness, community, leadership. We were talking about some of the ways that, like, in a lot of like organizing circles or artist circles, it's like, yeah, like being like an athlete or sports or like can be seen as like unintelligent, maybe, and like whether people articulate it that way or not. But as as someone as someone who used to delight in laying cats out on the football field in the past, and as someone who currently mentors like emerging filmmakers, leads a major cultural media center, how have you witnessed, attempted to model different forms of mentorship or leadership in these different spaces?
No, that goes back to it's a great question. It kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier for me of, I pretty much since college, which is, now almost 30 years ago,
Ain't that a
I've been I've been trying to, I've been on this journey of trying to unlearn, right?
Sure.
Um, and and so even with and the great part, obviously, of my experience with football specifically is leadership, right? Like there was, it's very hierarchical, but it's very cut and dry. Like when you're a fresh, when I was a freshman, I remember the first day of Hell Week that the senior varsity captains
Mm.
sat us all down and they had to give that pregame speech, right? And that leadership. And I knew at that point, one day I'm gonna be that person, or I strive to be. And then I became that person. And in a way it modeled, even though it was in this toxic kind of militarized way of leadership, it still gave me an opportunity to strive for or experience leadership. But now, and then complete opposite is, in my experience working in the community, it's all about collective leadership, right? It's all about not having a hierarchy. And so I'm still trying to figure out. So I can't. It feels weird to have that same approach to lead to as a leader now that I'm trying to help younger folks, to quote unquote mentor up and coming filmmakers. Um, so yeah, again, it's because I think I had a discussion with uh my wife the other day of I feel like, and I don't know how, I'm curious how you feel, but something like sports really forces you or helps you with your public speaking. Like,
Mm.
I think you're always communicating, especially at least from my experience in football, you had to step up, quote unquote, to the mic and give these halftime speeches.
Oh yeah.
You had to like get in someone's ear in an encouraging way, pick someone up, tell, like, come on, man, like, we need you. Like, you're
Yeah.
important. Like, you
So,
got this. Um, so trying to kind of not translate it, but to figure out how you can do that in a collective space. I mean, I'm curious for you because I know you played sports too. Like, what lessons and skills from sports have you been able to apply to teaching? Because I feel like
man,
it's
man.
yeah, or maybe what are some of the things that some people might see as negative or you know um perpetuating certain structures, but that you've actually felt like you've either benefited from or still have it's you still consider a tool in your toolbox.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I gather that kind of we share similarly as far as like our growing up is that we grew up in close proximity to like raised working class Black folks. And I think that was like, something that's been, has and continues to be a huge gift in my life. Um, for a lot of reasons. But, I think where my mind is going is like, something that I explained to my students. And I did this even in my like teaching demo when I was trying to get this job, was I was like, I went to my first interview, y'all. I was doing my teaching demo after I gone through my first round. And I was like, something I didn't mention, right, when in my first interview with the committee, right, is I talked about, my degrees, my research, my teaching experience, da, 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 da. But I was like, but I didn't name that like I worked 9 years in food service. I didn't name that like I was an MC and like, and had, made multiple like hip hop records at that like or that like I played, I grew up playing and coaching basketball. Right. And I was like, and these are like those three things like have done so many things for me to be an effective pedagogue. Right. So like fear, fear of public speaking wiped away by just those things, right? Connecting one-on-one with a customer who's maybe like in a bad mood or entitled and like acting hella funny style. Like, but you still have to keep your cool and like, and not take things personally, right? Like, but when I think of, sports specifically, like one of my favorite shows, it's very old at this point, but it was Friday Night Lights. Because I thought it really, really did a beautiful job of painting this picture of like really, I think like showing kind of behind the scenes all of the things that really build an effective winning sports team, right? It's like relationships, it's community, it's like yeah, like you were saying, picking people up when they're down and like having emotional intelligence in that way, right? And I think that it's like if you're outside of that culture like of sports, right, then you don't get to see those things, and that's why I really appreciated that show particularly. um but I think about like I've even done this like in my classes where I talk about different contexts in like in discourse and things like that, right? Because I was like I was like in the middle of a lecture, right? And then I was like, right. And then so I was like, it wouldn't make much sense for me in this context too. And I just like look at a student and I was like, hey, get through the screen, get through the screen. I was like, call him out, call him out. And they were like looking like hella like shaking up, like, what the fuck is going on? And I was like, see, like that makes an absolutely no sense in this particular context, right? I was like, but I was like in a totally other, opposite context, like I'm not actually mad at this person. And this, and me and this person are really, really good relationship. But like, it makes sense, for us to achieve our goal, right? To operate and communicate in this other way. And so if
Or
you,
in that context, it's actually a form of support and
yeah,
team being a team working together. Right.
yeah, yeah.
Sorry to cut you off. Sorry.
No, no, not at all. Like absolutely right. And I think the last thing I'll say is just like so much of what I've tried to do, particularly when I was working in 6 through 12, as an advisor or as a dean, as a teacher, especially with such a wide, Richmond is so diverse, right? And like in all aspects. But like I would really try to identify, who had really high social confidence, right? Who had really high academic confidence and really try to like see if I could help them build each other up, you know,
Mhm.
generally, right? And you might, you probably identify with this or this resonates probably is like a lot of the folks that we grew up that had the high social confidence, not necessarily a lot of academic confidence. Some of the folks like super, like high academic confidence, like really quiet, not necessarily like, into it. And then you had, some folks who had this mixture of both, right? And I feel fortunate, right, that I grew up in a way where I had, I never felt like I was like, yeah, I was never like that class clown or like, the homecoming king. But I was also like, not that I was like, I'm never gonna be the one that's like, you can fuck with this with me, right? And so it was like, trying to bridge that gap and then growing up and trying to, see folks' strengths, see, young folks' strengths and try to like shine lights on those, but then also like see how can we help each other, get stronger in the places maybe where we could improve. Um,
No, I think that's exactly why and again, I understand there's multiple lanes and multiple ways to inspire and to get, the ear of younger people, but at least people like me, I think you mentioned Bruce Lee, Kendrick, um, and Pop as a 12-year-old jock kid, I probably wouldn't have, I think that's what the power of Kendrick, right, is he has the ear of multiple people. He has the ear, he has, street cred to get the ear of some people, but then he has, the content to get the ear of others. And I just what I'm grappling, so for example, for me personally, and again, this is only for me, I don't know. I had to get to a certain level of I don't know, it sounds weird, like male confidence
mm,
to then be so confident to work on myself.
mm,
Like,
no,
so, but
I,
it's weird because the what got me to the level to where, you have to be really, I think you have to be confident to be critical of yourself. If you're insecure, to be critical, it's just not going to work.
1000%.
But I feel like this weird, at least again for me, it took this football, hip hop, bravado, machismo, like male identity to where I was solid with my masculinity, as toxic and misguided as it was,
Mm,
to therefore be confident enough to be like, okay, I need to unlearn a lot of
mm,
this.
mm,
Um, but again, for example, like similar to the artist we're talking about, an undergrad, I was part of this program called Peer Pacific Islander Education and Retention, and we would drive out and tutor specifically someone high school students at Carson High School.
mm,
And me being me, academically I'm still struggling, so I couldn't help them with their math homework. I couldn't
Mm.
help them with, their essays. But because I was one of the few tutors that played football, and a lot of
Yeah,
our students were football playing kind of jocks that were failing out of their classes,
yeah,
I was able to connect, whether that's because I knew I could identify, I could see myself in them, or I had enough quote unquote masculine street cred for them to like get their respect, which honestly, I'm sure, if I never had an educator or teacher like you, like I'm sure you have a certain cool factor, which comes from your life in hip hop, in sports, that would at least attract students like me, and that's an angle that some people don't have. So again, I'm just curious what you think of for you. Yeah, just what you think about, like, again, the question is, what is positive masculinity?
Mm.
Um, because again, I think I mentioned it, and I was open to it, but the approach at first I took was, all right, like the way to better myself is just to try to silence and erase masculinity. Like the only, in a very naive way, I thought was the only like positive masculinity is no masculinity, right?
Mm.
Which I'm realizing now, evolving is not necessarily true, or potentially impossible.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I'm wondering for you, where you, I mean, it's impossible, not impossible. It's hard. It's a big question, but what is your image of positive masculinity? That's the wrong word, but you know
Uh,
what I mean?
I appreciate it. Man. Well, I mean, like you said, it's such a hard, it's such a hard thing to think about for so many reasons. But I'm like on Friday, August 15th at 3:33 p.m. These are my thoughts, right? And I say that just because, this is an ever evolving thing. Am constantly reevaluating, reassessing all these things, right? And so tomorrow I might think differently. I'll be like, oh, I actually don't know. But um our homie Varak once said to me that, he basically describes uh I'm sure I'm not saying it verbatim, but I remember him saying some things that stuck with me around just like, that his perception was around, that gendered roles aren't necessarily like negative. Like what's negative is when gendered roles become hierarchical and like some are deemed, like worthy of more praise or respect or money, these kinds of things. And also just like, I think when it comes to like transphobia, when it comes to cis heteronormativity, right? Just the way so many human beings are invisibilized, be targeted for violence because of these hierarchies and rigidity around gender roles and expectations. And so, for me, what I'm on this perpetual journey of just like how can I learn more as a cishet man specifically about everybody who doesn't occupy that positionality, right? And so the more that I've read, that I've learned, that I've just listened, right? I think like that's been the hugest thing is listening, right? Because I don't think a lot of times like I think as cishet men, we and boys we get trained to, if we're listening to respond and maybe to like debate that kind of thing. And so it's for me to like really learn and have a lot of like support as a young person. I particularly want to shout out my mama around like not learning how to listen and be in dialogue as opposed to debate. That comes to mind. I think about you know, just like in what ways do I need to heal, right? Like you were talking about this a ton, and these is all in the books, just around like what are the things that were kind of like really like beaten into me from like a really young age around just like what is and isn't manly and like how do I still carry it. And I think, our generation looks way healthier than, generations before us, but I also can tell that, we still ain't perfect by any means. And, it's like, grew up on like some Mix-a-Lot, Baby Got Back, and it's not to say, shit like that doesn't exist anymore. But I guess the last thing that I'll say is, I think, Kimberly Crenshaw at UCLA, coins intersectionality. And so I think that's the biggest thing that I kind of like think about when I think about manhood and masculinity and what it potentially looks like to be healthy, because I think until we can really identify and resist all forms of oppression and dehumanization, like we're not going to get to a great place specifically around tackling patriarchy, because the ways that like a lot of it gets set up in my mind in thinking about combating sexism is a lot of times through a white middle class lens of feminism, right? And like and what ultimately I've seen so much, played out over and over and over is like seeing like hyper men, like hyper masculine men of color, and maybe specifically black men kind of being like the poster child stereotype for like what sexism looks like, right? And I think like if you are, consciously or unconsciously framing, you know, men who are like raised poor, working class, and or of color as and equating hypermasculinity to toxic masculinity, that like you're actually positioning some people who have the least uh, proximity to power in the context of the United States,
Mm.
falsely as like, the arbiters of sexism,
Mm.
right? And so I think that's like incredibly fucked up and problematic, and doesn't acknowledge all the different intersections of our identities. Doesn't acknowledge anti-Black racism. It doesn't acknowledge classism and capitalism and legacies of all kinds of dehumanization. Um, but yeah, so I mean, to me, it's just like, how are we constantly trying to examine, it's praxis,
Hmm.
reflection, reflection, act, try to be a little better. Um, but yeah,
Yeah. No, I think going off of that, I think that's what parenthood has brought to me is that praxis, right? I think in the because a lot of parenting for me, you have this intellectual theoretical approach, but then when it comes down to it, it's a lot of it's just purely emotional
mm,
sometimes. And then and that's when, you know, I'll see the toxicity come out, right? Like I think that's what's going back to the book, Mike De La Rocha talks about, it shares the exact same story that I happened, when my son was little. And then actually this goes actually to this form, you're talking about sports and maybe misguided forms of leadership. I realized how much I feel I need to dominate even my own kid.
mm,
And like where I flashed on my own son, like, and that was shocking to me, right? The person that you love the most, I
yeah,
straight up flashed on him, like, like I will either physically reprimand you or verbally, and that
mm,
was terrible. But at the same time, as a parent, and especially, like because I think the stereotype, right, of like bougie white parents is like let their kids just run around, no discipline, the whole like uh I mean, I think multiple comedians have talked about it, right? When they
sure,
go to
yeah.
their white friend's house and their friends say, "They go, fuck you, mom," like, and you're just like, "Whoa,"
Absolutely.
I think there's this, at least for me, I have this weird like, as a person of color, my kids are gonna again. I think the goal is still correct. Maybe my tactics are wrong, but there's a level of respect, right? There's a level of respecting elders. And so how I'm trying to get to that point, and I'm sure there's much better methods, but I'm realizing the only tool that I had, and I'm trying to gain more tools is to flash on them, is
Mm,
to be like, no, like,
yeah.
even the whole thing of like theoretically, I don't want to force my kids to physically do anything they don't want to, like hug someone or someone hug them. But when my kid doesn't give their grandma a hug, sometimes I catch myself forcing them, no, give Nanda a hug, and so again, it's just these, as a parent, in a great way, you're forced head on with these conflicts daily.
Mhm. Thank you so much for sharing that vulnerability. I definitely, man, I was just like thinking, I was thinking this morning about like I like lost my patience with my daughter the other day, and I like woke up just feeling like hella bad about it, and so it's just like, but I think, and I would argue, uh, women, femmes, who do mothering, especially know this in much more profound ways than we do. But just like, I just think, as parents in this society and world generally, that we're like not set up for a lot of success, even if we happen to be like really privileged professionals living in the US context, there's not a lot of support. I mean, there's just not a lot of care for young people. I would argue in this period in time, especially in thinking about the future and planning for the future. And I think about like the indigenous, concept of seven generations and how like miserably, this society is failing, kind of thinking about seven generations ahead. Um, but as we kind of close out, man, I've just so enjoyed chopping it up with you. But just because of time, I need to start closing things out. Um, a way that I close out every single interview is with a couple questions. And the first is, I know that we're both avid music lovers, and so the first of these last two questions I have for you is, what is a song, a musical artist, and or an album that you would pair with these books, and why?
Um, well, for Mike's book, Sacred Lessons, I mean, Mike's a singer, super talented artist. So I mean, Mike could pretty much lace their own soundtrack for the
Yeah.
book. But
Yeah.
going back to that moment where I got to know Mike, um, again, his cousin Zach De La Rocha, at the time when we were in college, Rage came out with the album Battle of Los Angeles, and I would
Mhm.
say that just reminds me of my relationship and my how much of a privilege it is to read a book by someone you know
Mm.
and learn from them. There's points in the book where I was there that he's talking about, he's talking about his UCLA days, but then there's also parts that I didn't had no clue about him. So I would say Rage. And then for well, I mean, I kind of I understand that it's I feel a certain way by saying this, but for Seven Circles, the immediate album I thought about was A Tribe Called Red, their self-entitled first album, which came
Mm.
out around the time again that I discovered them and I was living in Arizona. But I also recognize that that's super stereotypical to just like connect another native indigenous, artist with this book. But I think Seven Circles again is one aspect of this native movement, contemporary native
Mm.
movement that continues to inspire me, and that includes music like A Tribe Called Red, which is now the Hallucination.
Mhm.
Um, again, streetwear, art, books, as well as even wellness and working out. So I guess those would be the two albums I would connect.
Oh, love it. And I've seen Hallucination and Tribe Called Red four different times. One of my favorite groups, for sure.
It's definitely an experience to go to one of their shows. It's yeah, it's super. I went to one of their shows, and especially the way they utilized media, archival footage with the background.
Yeah.
At the same time, like I was just zoning out too.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And then the last piece is not actually a question, but it's asking. I want to ask you if you could please Complete the following sentence. People should read the seven circles and sacred lessons because dot dot dot.
I would say because at this moment in time, there's so much work to do, and we're so limited in our own capacity that we need both our community and ancestors to help us not only get through it, but to make the change that we really need right now.
Mm. Woo. Fire. Brother Tad, so good spending time with you today. Thank you so much for being a guest. Want to dedicate this episode to the late, great Robert A. Nakamura and your powerful family. Um, yeah, and just, yeah, much love to the fam, bro. And yeah, look forward to connecting soon. Thank you so much again.
I appreciate it. No, thank you so much. And yeah, this was fun. I could chop it up for another hour and a half.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Same. Well, everybody out there, thank you so much for tuning in. We hope you have a great week ahead and we hope you enjoyed the flight. Gambate. Peace.